I'm Leif Poland.
And I'm Eric Carlson.
And together we make Carb-Loaded. Well, today we're going to be talking with this week's guest, Professor Tim Noakes. Professor Noakes is a researcher and educator, and he has run more than 70 marathons and ultramarathons, and is the author of the book, Lore of Running. He is also the co-founder of the Sports Science Institute of South Africa, and we are very excited to spend some time with this obviously very busy man. Thanks for joining us, Professor Noakes.
Pleasure. Thank you, Leif. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. And because of some overseas bandwidth issues, we get to just see a still frame of Professor Noakes, but we're most interested in the words and then seeing him specifically. But we'll have a nice conversation today. So maybe what I'll do, Professor Noakes, is start you out with kind of the burning question that a lot of people associate with you and your research. And the question is, what are some common myths about carb loading for endurance athletes?
Well, I think the first myth would be that it's been proven that carbohydrate loading is beneficial for everyone. If you look back at the history of the early studies on carbohydrate loading, I think we kind of accepted it as true without really looking carefully at the data. We did a study in 2000, where we did a placebo-controlled trial of carbohydrate loading, for example. So it was the first trial where athletes were actually given fake carbohydrate. There was no carbohydrate, but it tasted as if it was carbohydrate. And they believed they were carbohydrate loading. And then we had them do a 100-kilometer time trial, and we found absolutely no effect at all. And so that paper has really been ignored. And I didn't really take it seriously because I just thought, oh, well, it's just another finding. Probably we did something wrong. But then when one goes and looks back at the literature, it's actually surprising at the quality of research on carbohydrate loading and the fact that there's never been a proper controlled study except ours. So that makes one a little bit skeptical, but much more to the point. We definitely know now that there are two groups of human athletes, those who can metabolize carbohydrate easily and those who can't. Now, I can't metabolize carbohydrate, so I'm carbohydrate resistant or insulin resistant. And when I take carbohydrates, I don't store it as glycogen or carbohydrate in my muscles and in my liver. I store it as fat in my liver and fat in my body. And when I look at many of the athletes today who are reading my book, Lore of Running, and are saying I'm an athlete, therefore I must carbohydrate load, they're fat. And the reason they're fat is because they're not carbohydrate tolerant, they're carbohydrate resistant. And my view now is that they should, in fact, reduce the amount of carbohydrate. They should carbohydrate unload. They would lose weight, and I believe they would run better as a consequence. So I don't contest that the best athletes in the world, the Kenyans, eat a very high carbohydrate diet. But they are incredibly lean, and it's not impossible that the Kenyans who are not quite as lean because they're a little bit carbohydrate resistant are 3 kilograms heavier, and they don't win the marathons because they're eating too much carbohydrate. No one asked that question. But what I am saying is that let's not worry about the elite athletes. Let's look at the guys who are running 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours in the marathon, and they're carrying extra body fat. Carbohydrate loading isn't going to help them because I will bet that the carbohydrates are simply making them fatter. And if they were to lose weight by reducing their carbohydrate consumption, they would run faster without having to do any more training. So that's my point. My point is that I believe carbohydrate loading helps some athletes, but I don't believe it helps all athletes. And if you're overweight, as we'll discuss further, I don't think that you should be eating too much carbohydrate.
Wow, and that's a pretty radical notion for a lot of people that have kind of taken it as a fact that if you're going to be involved in endurance sports, as a matter of course, you carbo load. That's just what you do, and it's one of those things that people have put very little thought and research into. They just kind of follow the masses on that.
Indeed, and you know what happens when we make errors in science is because we got the model wrong. So most athletes would argue this way. They'd say the more carbohydrate I eat, the more my muscle glycogen goes up, and muscle glycogen will make me run further and faster. And I'm not convinced that that's true. It may well be true for exercise, let's say, lasting an hour. But once you go over 2 hours or 3 hours, the main fuel you use is fat. And taking too much carbohydrate impairs your fat metabolism and may be detrimental. So it's this model that the athletes have, is that anything that makes my glycogen go up will make me run faster. And it's not that simple. That explanation is far too simple. Firstly, as the exercise becomes longer, glycogen becomes increasingly less important. And secondly, we're not all the same. And some of us cannot store glycogen from carbohydrate. We just store fat.
Right.
And so those are the two criteria. So once the exercise becomes longer than 3 hours, and once we discover that there are some people who are carbohydrate intolerant, those two groups, running longer and being carbohydrate intolerant, you'll do much better reducing your carbohydrate content of your diet rather than increasing it.
Sure. You know, it's interesting because Eric and I are coming at this topic from really the completely opposite side of the tracks. Really, we're researching kind of the non-athlete and the non-athlete over-consuming carbohydrates. And it's funny because when I first started working on this project, it was like, well, obviously athletes have to carbo load, but I'm not going to worry about that piece of the puzzle. And then doing research, I started coming across people that were saying, no, that's not the case. Then I came across some of your research, and then it kind of made our side of the tracks that much more significant.
Indeed. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, because, and in fact, people criticize the dietary guidelines because they said, well, these are fine for athletes, but they aren't fine for people who aren't doing exercise. Well, the answer is they're not even ideal for all athletes. So even the people who are doing the exercise are not going to be able to metabolize all that carbohydrate if they're carbohydrate intolerant, and they're going to have the same problems as the people who are inactive. And what I've learned in my own experiences is that exercise has almost nothing to do with weight control. Now, people will say, you know, that's ridiculous. And the reality is you should be able to regulate your weight without exercising, and then your metabolism is right. If you can't regulate your weight without exercising vigorously, it's because your nutrition is wrong for your metabolism. So I have athletes, for example, who will go into heavy training over 6 months and they'll lose 10 kilograms. And then you'll say, oh, you see, therefore I lost the 10 kilograms because I was exercising. Not true. You put them on the right diet and they will stay at that lowest weight, whether they do a minute's exercise or not. And that's the key. You have to find the diet that will keep you at your lowest weight without doing any exercise. Then you found the right diet. If you have to exercise to maintain your weight, your diet's wrong.
Wow, that's interesting.
No, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, and Tim, obviously, based on your background, Professor Noakes, I mean, you're not arguing that exercise is beneficial, but that being said, the fact that we should exercise is not to maintain our weight so much as, hey, it's good for our body in general. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely, and I think you exercise to protect your brain amongst many things. That's keep your brain functioning properly. You need to exercise. So, but I absolutely agree. The benefits of exercise are unbelievable, very important. And it's really interesting if you look at it that this whole move away from carbohydrates is driven by athletes, athlete doctors like myself. Because as we got older, we put on weight and we said, hold it, I don't want to accept this. I don't accept my aging. Why can't I run as fast as I did 20 years ago? Why am I X kilograms heavier than I was 10 years ago? And we started asking the question because we didn't accept it. We didn't accept aging. And then we started looking into the reasoning. And we discovered that it was our nutrition that was our problem. We were trying to exercise. We were all exercisers. We believed that exercise was the answer. And we found that wasn't the case. So that's what I found really, really interesting about this whole nutrition debate. That it's really being driven as I've said, by former athletes who don't accept that you have to get fat and lazy and with age.
So, Professor Noakes, what do you think then has driven, kind of the standard American diet? When you look at that, at the food pyramid and at what people do day to day, then what motivates your average person to kind of eat, carbo load, for lack of a better term?
Well, unfortunately, it goes back to President Richard Nixon in the 1972 election, where he decides for political reasons that he's going to make the farmers wealthy and bring the cost of food down. And so he appoints Earl Butt as the Secretary of Agriculture, and he changes the marketing and the production of corn in the United States. And as a consequence, the corn becomes the main driver of nutrition in the United States of America. And in my view, because government was pushing it that way, the scientists had to follow. And so in 1977, we have the Senate Committee of McGovern's Senate Committee, and they come up with this new food pyramid, which is drawn up by a person who had no training in the nutrition sciences and who was a vegan. And so he draws up these guidelines. Now, if you ask a modern dietitian, so where does the dietary guidelines come from? And they'll tell you it's the 1977, and it's the decree of the McGovern Committee. And no one asks, well, hold on, what about hundreds of years of science before that and since? Why are we just going to obliterate that and forget about it and only consider the words of this vegan who didn't use science to draw up the current guidelines? So that's the tragedy. The guidelines which were drawn up were commercially driven, they were politically driven, and they've been politically supported by organizations like the National Institute of Health in the United States, who absolutely will not find that they are wrong. That's because they know if they want to get funding from government that they must continue to plug that line and continue to sell the cheap carbohydrate products regardless of the health of the Americans. Now, unfortunately, the rest of the world, and I speak with passion from South Africa, follows the American model. Yeah. And I tell people, but hold on, why don't we go and look what the Swiss are eating, or the Norwegians, or the French, or the Austrians, because they're much healthier than the Americans. They're much thinner. Why don't we follow their guidelines? But because the United States is considered the #1 science and medicine nation in the world, we follow their guidelines. But it's abundantly clear to me, and if anyone who's got any vision and ever comes to the United States or looks at the data, from 1977, Americans have been getting fatter, and they've got this massive problem with diabetes. And it starts the day they're told to eat more carbohydrates. And the data clearly show that the Americans have followed instructions. They are eating more carbohydrates, and they're eating more cereals and grains, and they're eating more vegetable oils. And if you want to add more sugar, sorry, not more sugar, more high fructose corn syrup, sugar consumption has gone down. Right. So if you want to look at the cause of obesity in the United States of America, you have to look at that nutritional change. Now, what's happening is industry is petrified that we should finally discover that food processing is causing the problem. So what they've done is they've gone and aligned a series of serious scientists who've got high profile, and they funded them to say the following: that it's the calories in your diet that makes you fat, and therefore you've got to exercise more to balance those calories. And provided you exercise more, you can eat what you like. And that's completely and utterly bogus, because it's the food that's driving the obesity, not the lack of exercise. And my own experience and looking at the literature now convinced me that it's what you put in your mouth makes you fat. And it doesn't matter whether you exercise or not. That isn't going to make much difference, as we've already discussed.
Yeah. Well, and it's a polarizing topic. Anytime you're talking about bottom line and dollars that are going to be, made, people are going to get pretty upset about it on many levels. And so it's not surprising that a lot of people are trying to convince others that carbs are not the problem. It's also interesting what you said about that as far as the attitude that you can eat anything as long as you exercise. That's why you have a lot of people who may on the outside appear thin, but then end up with heart disease and some of these other problems because of their diet. So that data lines up with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, they're eating too much refined carbohydrates and too much vegetable oils, the omega-6 vegetable oils, and that's a toxic combination. And that's producing the inflammation inside the body that's really killing us. And it's not the cholesterol, as you guys know, it's this inflammatory response,
right,
which is related to the carbohydrates and the omega-6s in the diet.
So maybe I can ask you then, Professor Noakes, what was it for you? We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe more specifically, what was it for you? Because as I mentioned, you are a marathon runner, you're an athlete yourself. What made you want to dig deeper into this topic about carbohydrates?
Well, it was complete chance, because now remember that I'm a so-called scientist and a medical doctor, and I'm meant to know everything, and I assumed I knew everything, and I assumed that nothing was hidden from me, because I'm an avid reader. And anyway, what happened was I finished writing my most recent book called Waterlog, which is an expose of how the sports drink industry manipulated information to sell their product, and as a consequence caused major ill health, this condition of exercise-associated hyponatremia, which I was the first to describe and which has caused 12 deaths and more than 2,000 people needing to be hospitalized. And the condition is purely driven by industry telling people to drink as much as they can during exercise. So I was sensitized to the fact that industry isn't out there to make you healthy, it's out there to make a profit. So the night I finished Waterlog, which had been a 30-year effort, my brain said to me in the middle of the night, woke up and said, you must get up at 6 o'clock next morning and run. Now, of course, I had been running, but my running was so terrible, it was so appalling, that I found it difficult and unpleasant, and everything was making me not want to run. Here's a guy who's run all this amount. My running was such a disaster that I felt embarrassed of running. So anyway, I got up at 6 o'clock as I was told, and I ran, and of course now I've got a Garmin and I measure how fast I run. Now I ran the 56-mile Comrades Marathon at 7 minutes and 20 a mile, or 4 minutes 30 a kilometer. We work in kilometers, but just to give you an idea, so it's 4 minutes 30. I kept that up for 56 miles and some of the biggest hills in any race in the world. Now I go out there on this morning and I can't run 7 minutes a kilometer. And I hit the tiniest hill and I'm almost breathless and my heart rate goes to 150. And by the third hill, I'm almost walking. So I said, okay, we've got a problem. We've got to sort this out. So I go back and I happen to be reading my emails and I get this advert. And it says lose 6 kilograms, that's about 14 pounds, in 6 weeks without hunger. And I said, but that's impossible. That's bogus. You can't lose weight without hunger. I've tried all my life. And the only way to lose weight, if you can, is to get hungry or to run 160 kilometers a week. Then I could lose some weight. But then I noticed it was written by 3 scientists, Jeff Volek and Steve Finney, who I have great respect for, and I knew their work. And so I said, now, why would they write bogus nonsense? So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to go and buy this book. So I got in my car, I drove 5 minutes down to the shops, and I bought the book. It had the last copy of the book. And I brought it home and I read it. And the first sentence was something like, there are 150 major studies showing the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet. So I said, but I don't know about any of these studies. Why not? So I looked at the references, and I saw they were real. They were published in good journals. So here was a whole body of literature of which I, a medical doctor and exercise scientist, was completely and utterly ignorant. So I read the book, and then I went and read Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. And that convinced me that there was a complete scam, that we were dealing with a scam. But before I got that far, I said, okay, fine. By lunchtime on that day, I said, no more carbohydrates. So I cut the carbs. And the interesting thing was, in 8 weeks' time, I had to go and give lectures in Sweden to their best long-distance runners. And I'd said, if I could be 6 kilograms lighter, I'd look a bit better and I'd have a bit more credibility. So it turns out I lost 11 kilograms in those 8 weeks without, for 1 minute, feeling hungry. Not 1 minute. There was not one moment that I felt that I deprived myself. And my running started to improve. And so from going where I couldn't run 5Ks in a reasonable time, by the time I reached Stockholm, we did a 20-kilometer run. And it was at minus 20 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
and we were running at 6 minutes 15 a kilometer, which I couldn't do 1 kilometer at 6:15, 8 weeks before. So I discovered that there was something else going on. It wasn't just the weight loss. There was something else going on. And then my running got better and better and better. And so I dropped 40 minutes on my half marathon time. Now all that tells you was how badly I was running, because I'm still way, way slower than I was when I was in my 20s. But now I feel like I'm a runner again, and I've come home today from a fantastic run on Ron Clark's course. Ron Clark was one of my great running heroes, and he ran in Cape Town. And one of the tougher mountain runs is named after him. It's a 12-kilometer run, and I've dropped my time by 40 minutes on that run as well.
Wow.
And today I was 5 minutes off my best time. I just had a fantastic run. And I'm 3 years older now than 2 years older than when I started the diet. And I just feel fantastic. And I'm running, for a 63-year-old, I'm not running fantastically fast, but the reality is I think it's fast and I'm really enjoying it. So that's my story. And the key is, you got to try it. People try it, and it's not been the only benefit I had. I've lost a whole bunch of symptoms. They've just disappeared because I clearly had an allergy to various cereals and grains. I used to have allergic rhinitis, or that's runny noses, but worse, an allergic bronchitis which got into exercise-induced asthma. And I would wheeze and after running, often on many days. But more importantly, I'd get a serious bronchitis at least 3 times a year, which I'd have to treat with steroids. And I would be sick for a week. I'd be terribly sick. I haven't had one of those for 2.5 years. It's just gone. And my lungs are just fantastic. So all the other advantages are just amazing. And today I'm 20 kilograms lighter than I was when I started. I'm now back at the weight I was in 1981, when I was a bit heavier than when I started running in the 1970s. I was about 77, 76 kilos, but I'm down to 81 now. But I was 81 in the 1980s when I was running 3-hour marathons. But I was running 140 to 160 kilometers a week, and now I'm training 30 to 40 kilometers a week. My weight's the same. That's my point. That's my point about this. You don't have to do 140 kilometers a week to remain thin, if you've got the diet right.
Right. That's one of the things I appreciate about you, Professor Noakes, is you're able to walk the walk, so to speak. There's an expression here in the States, and I'm sure it's the equivalent over there is that a person can be an armchair quarterback, which is a person that they can talk and say, well, this the guy should have done this and we should do that with our diet and all these sorts of things, but meanwhile they're not doing it. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you, Professor Noakes, is you're actually living this. You're doing it and you're able to perform on the endurance level with this kind of a diet.
That's exactly right. And I know what it was like when I wasn't on this diet. And then you see, I've helped some of South Africa's greatest athletes of all time, who are now 50 and 55 and struggling like I was. They've gone back to where they were performing 30, 20 years ago. It's astonishing.
Wow.
Most recently, a guy tweeted me and he said, thank you, your advice. He was a good runner. He said, my running was appalling. I was running a 4-hour marathon. In about 4 months, I've dropped 12 Ks and I've dropped an hour off my marathon time. I'm running 2:56 again. Which from 4 hours to 2:56, I mean, it's just chalk and cheese. A 2:56 marathon is a hard run marathon, whatever age you are. And this guy's in his 50s. And a year ago, he was struggling to finish the race in 4 hours. And there's something besides the weight loss. There's something about the high carbohydrate diet that is toxic for you if you're carbohydrate intolerant.
Yeah, I mean, well, the proof's in the pudding there, I mean, right? Although I disagree with Leif. I don't think we should call it walking the walk. I think we should call it running the run in this particular. We're coining a new phrase.
And let me just add, the funniest thing is that when we debate this, people say, "Oh, but you're an N equals 1." But I mean, the beauty of an N equals 1 is that I can change the parameters on a weekly basis and find out what works and what doesn't work. So I'm experimenting with a whole bunch of range of supplements, which would take me 30 years to prove whether these supplements made any difference. But I can get a very good handle on what's working for me and what doesn't work for me, because my performance is now so stable that anything that I change will produce, if it's going to produce a performance change, I will be able to measure it. And the second point is when I debate with the doctors and the scientists, and they're all overweight and they look unhealthy and they've got diseases. Yeah. Well, the point is when I just stand up now, I've got credibility because I look lean and I look healthy. Yeah. And that makes the difference, and they don't look healthy. I remember I had a massive debate, which was very difficult at my own university, because I've been a bit demonized by my own faculty, for whom I've done so much good and so much research. And the one lady got up, who's an endocrinologist, and she tackled me for testing my blood glucose every few hours. She said, "You're advertising glucose monitors and you're just as bad as the drug people pushing drugs," and so on and so forth. And it was astonishing that she should attack me. She shouldn't say, "Thank you for trying to solve the problem."
Right.
And it turns out she's got a major medical condition related to nutrition, which she refuses to address. Mm-hmm. So she's in denial. Yeah. And then I get attacked as an N equals 1 trying to do something. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, there's not a problem as I drink my 2 gallons of soda.
No, exactly.
That is the mentality. But it is interesting too. I like the point too, and one thing we can't delve into this time-wise in this particular hangout. Maybe we'll have to have another one. But what you mentioned about insulin resistance too for certain individuals, and that you can tweak things to your own level. So it's not necessarily for everyone eliminating all carbohydrates, but it's monitoring for you what is okay, how much is okay, and definitely not to the levels that your average person, unfortunately, thinks is normal right now. So this brings me to one. Oh, go ahead, Leif.
No, go ahead. So if I can just butt in there to answer that question, absolutely. Now, it turns out I'm diabetic, and I'm treating myself as diabetic. And a diabetic, if you want to live a long life, you better have 25 grams to 50 grams carbohydrate a day. And no more, because if you have more than that and you're not medicating properly, your glucose is going to be running over 5.5, and you're just going to get all the complications of the disease. Mm-hmm. So what I've learned is that diabetes is not a problem. If you keep your glucose below 5.5, below 5 all day, you're never going to get the complications of diabetes. And the complications occur in diabetics who are not properly medicated, and they're put on high carbohydrate diets, and they never get their glucose below about 7. You might as well not even bother. If your glucose is above 7, don't bother. Eat all you like, because you're going to die from all the complications. But if you want to rigorously control your diet and bring your glucose down, you will be fine, and you probably live longer than other people who don't know this. So that's my position. However, what I realize is that the message to athletes is eat the least amount of carbohydrate that you need, not the most. And in Law of Running, my book, it says eat as much carbohydrate as you possibly can. That is completely wrong. I don't believe there's an athlete in this world who needs to eat more than 200 grams of carbohydrate a day, regardless of what exercise they're doing. If they're taking 200 grams a day, they will be able to perform optimally, and they'll be their least weight, and they'll be the healthiest. And that's the key. You want to be your lowest weight, you want to be your healthiest, and you want to perform the best. And it's all 3. And when you get all 3 right, you're eating the right amount of carbohydrate. And if you're eating 60% carbohydrate diet, 500 grams of carbohydrate a day, and your glucose is all over the place, and your weight's 5 kilograms too heavy, and you will not be performing well. And that's what you have to look for. You've got to look at all 3 factors: weight, performance, and health.
And for some of our viewers tuning in now too, it's a good example. Some have taken issue with Professor Noakes because of what he wrote in his book Lore of Running, and now saying, wait, no, don't eat a lot of carbohydrates. But that's someone who has seen the data, looked at the research, worked with other researchers, understands what medical personnel and scientists are saying, and so is making the change. And I think it's a good example for what we need to do if we want to be successful, is not just stay in a cocoon and think one way, but to look at what data is out there and then make adjustments where necessary.
Indeed, and what I accuse my profession of is something called reverse gullibility. So my profession is very proud that it's not gullible. You've got to give us the evidence before we will accept it. The problem here is that there is so much evidence that what I'm saying is correct, and people don't see it. So they're suffering from reverse gullibility. In other words, the evidence is there and they refuse to see it.
Yeah.
And that's what the frustration is.
Yeah. All right, so a fun question then, maybe before we move on to our Twitter users, because I know they got a few good ones today that Late's going to pop for us, or for you in particular, Professor Noakes. But just a fun one we like to ask people who hang out with us for a little bit. What did you eat for your last meal?
Okay, so now it's in Cape Town, it's now 7 o'clock at night. I last ate 12 hours ago. I'm being absolutely serious with you. I last ate 12 hours ago for breakfast, and what I had was a single rye vita. That's a sort of a rye, it's not bread, it's a dried out cracker. It's a rye cracker with lots of butter, lots of liver pate, and lots of cheese, and a cup of coffee. I had probably 2 cups of tea during the day, and I ran, as I said, 12 kilometers at lunchtime, and it was quite a hard run, and that's all I've eaten. Now, the reason I've only eaten that is because yesterday I had a big breakfast and I had a big lunch, and because I was at a conference, and there was good food. So when I see good food, I eat to my full and beyond. And then I know that I will be 24 hours, I won't need to eat. So that's, in all honesty, what I've eaten today was a tiny amount. And even as I sit here at 7 o'clock at night, 12 hours later, I have no hunger. But my wife is cooking salmon and veg, and I'm going to eat my full tonight. But my point is, the way I eat now is if I eat one big meal every day or 2, and that's it. And the rest I just snack.
Nice.
Very nice. Well, let me ask you, I'll ask you 2 of these Twitter questions because I don't want to keep you from your dinner. Let's see here. Help Diet SA writes on Twitter, do you believe that obesity is a disease of the brain, i.e. an addiction, and should be classified and treated as such?
I've realized in the last 3 weeks or so that obesity it's a food addiction. And the only way you can treat obesity is to find out the food that people are addicted to. So when someone who believes they're overweight speaks to me and asks, what do? I said, well, what foods are you addicted to? That's the first question I ask. And I'll immediately tell you, oh, Doc, it's the Coca-Cola, or it's the sugar, or it's the sweets or something, or it's the chocolates. They know. And then we've got to address that. And what happens is, humans are designed to be lean. We're all designed to be lean marathon runners. If we're not lean, it's because the homeostat, the regulator of weight, has been affected, and it's not in balance. And you have to get the regulator back in balance. And the regulator is destroyed by the addictive foods that industry produces to sell product. So industry and food processors know exactly how to addict you to a particular food. And when you're eating those foods, you're hungry every 3 hours. And I've given you my example. I'm hungry every 12 hours at maximum. And then it's a real hunger. It's not an addiction. It's not a craving. I see good food and I enjoy eating it. Most people eat in response to addictions that their brain is saying, where's the next cigarette, or where's the next alcohol? It's exactly the same. Where's the next addictive food? So that's how I treat obesity. We say, what are you addicted to? Let's remove that addictive food. Now, the reason why nutrition advice doesn't work is because the nutritionists say you must eat less of the same food.
Right.
And that's like saying someone smoked, instead of smoking 50 cigarettes, they smoke 2 a day. Can't do it. Those 2 will become 3, will become 10, will become 20. And that's what happens. So you have to dig down and get out the addictive foods. And it turns out the addictive foods are the processed foods. So you've got to get back to eating real foods.
Right.
And it turns out the real foods are the ones that contain protein and fat. And may I also add that I believe humans are designed to search for fat in the diet. If you look at traditional society, the hunter-gatherers, they went for fat animals. They didn't go for muscular, meaty animals.
Right.
They went for the fat animals. So I believe that our evolution what made us set up to hunt for fat. Along came the 1977 eating guidelines, and they said we must hunt for carbohydrate. And unfortunately, if you hunt for carbohydrate, you're in trouble, because you're going to be addicted and you're going to overeat, and you'll never get your weight down.
Right.
As soon as you start hunting for fat, you'll be fine, because you can't overeat on fat.
Right. All right, good. I'm glad we asked. Let's see here. Let's take one more. This is from THFZA, and the question is, how would you explain low-carb, high-fat to a general practitioner who may be skeptical if it is healthy?
I'd say to the general practitioner that for 3.5 million years, humans were designed to eat high-fat, high-protein, low-carbohydrate diets, and the carbohydrates that we ate were completely different. They were very fibrous and difficult to digest. And they did not expose our bodies to a high carbohydrate load, which is rapidly digested. And I would say, too, if he was a person in Africa, I would say, have you ever seen a giraffe? Does a giraffe eat a balanced diet? And the answer is no, they just eat one plant, acacia leaf. And I would say, how is it possible for this enormous animal to eat just one plant and get all its nutrients from one plant, the acacia plant? And the answer is the giraffe co-evolved with that food. And it is able to extract all the energy and nutrients it requires from that acacia plant because of its co-evolution. The original giraffes died off if they weren't able to live only on those plants. And so I would say that humans co-evolved with animal protein and fish protein and carbohydrate, but a totally different carbohydrate. And that if you go and look at the traditional societies eating those diets, they do not have the chronic diseases that we have today. And I would say then, and secondly, I'd say that most of the diseases you see in your medical practice were not present in those populations, and they've only become more prevalent since 1977, since we adopted this high carbohydrate, low fat diet. And so I would say, I advise you to go and look on the internet and read the literature showing that if you do not eat enough carb fat and enough protein, and you have a lot of processed foods which are high in carbohydrates, the human body simply can't function optimally on that diet. And then I'd say, go and try it yourself. Give it 4 weeks. Follow the diet that is prescribed by myself and others for 4 weeks. And if you do not feel happier and healthier and you've lost weight, then I'm wrong. But if after 4 weeks you feel rejuvenated, then you know what the answer is.
Right. Very nice. Well, like I was saying earlier, the proof is in the pudding, because you're able to kind of live the lifestyle with good results that you're advocating. And so I think that to people that disregard this concept, really they need to examine the fruitage of the diet. If you garbage in, garbage out kind of a scenario. Yeah. So if they can look to someone like yourself, and there's not just you, I mean, there's a lot of people. We just interviewed Jimmy Moore a couple weeks ago, and fantastic gentleman. He started out, he weighed 450 pounds.
It's astonishing. I know Jimmy well, yeah. And the interesting thing.
And then you can see the results, and he feels the results.
Exactly. And and no one will explain why he was better off at 400 pounds eating a high carbohydrate diet.
Right.
Are we to believe now? So my colleagues tell me I should rather be 20 kilograms heavier than I am today eating their diet, and I'd be healthier. Well, I just don't follow that logic at all.
It doesn't make sense. Well, misery likes company, I think is what it is. Well, we really appreciate you taking some time out. We know that this was not exactly convenient for you. We know that the time zones and everything, this kind of pushes this later into the evening for you. But we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us a little bit about this, Professor Noakes.
Well, thank you both very much. It's really been a real pleasure and a privilege to chat to you. And I wish you every success in what you're doing, because it's actually vital. We have to save people from themselves. And the more information we get out there and the more the work you do gets out there, the more people's lives we're going to save.
Well, thank you again. Our guest next week is Dr. Jeffrey Gerber, and he will be discussing cholesterol and inflammation, among other things.
Yeah, that'll be an awesome topic. We're looking forward to have Dr. Gerber on the show. But until then, of course, you can always go and check us out at Carb-Loaded.com, or you can connect with us, I should say, through any one of the social media sites that we're on as well.
Awesome. So thanks again, Professor Noakes, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Would you like to stay in the loop about what's happening with the Carb-Loaded documentary? Visit Carb-Loaded.com. Give us your email address, and we'll keep you up to date.